Hi, everybody. I'm Frank Stanisci, and welcome to CFL Talk. You can watch all our episodes here of Candid Frank Live, CFL Talk, and all the other shows on Candid Frank Live on YouTube. This is, of course, CFL Talk, and it doesn't happen without David Morassutti. David, how you doing, buddy?
Not too bad, not too bad. The days are getting darker now, Frank.
Yeah, and shorter too.
It's a little depressing, not gonna lie.
It's not. The sad part of the year comes around February, which is why that's where the sad sad comes from. But it is what it is. But you know what? Along with the shorter days, the colder weather, comes the CFL playoffs, and then of course the Grey Cup. So and other things happen too. You get the World Series, hockey starts. So, the forever cycle that is the world of sports continues, and there's always the upside and the downside. For now, all most teams in the Canadian Football League, if I can bring it back to the Canadian Football League, still have a chance for the playoffs. As desperate as times seem for some teams, for example, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who are free falling even among their fans. The belief in the team, I don't think, has been this low since about 2 years after the Grey Cup, and then Chris Jones came into Saskatchewan. I don't think I've seen Saskatchewan and the people who love that team in this kind of state.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm gonna bring up the betting angle again. I was one of those people that saw, Saskatchewan in that, 7.5 point underdogs, and I'm like, that seems quite generous towards Winnipeg, and then not knowing where Saskatchewan was even going into the league. But yeah, Saskatchewan is just there's such an interesting case this year. Like if I'm a Saskatchewan fan, this is such a disappointing year, and it just seems like we're going into a certain direction with this team, where if they fail to reach expectations, changes I think are going to be coming about.
I can't disagree, and those changes could start with the head coach, a very likable person, a vastly experienced coach in the Canadian Football League. Admittedly, his experience came from special teams. There aren't many head coaches that whose background is special teams. In fact, he still runs the special teams there in Saskatchewan. That doesn't mean I agree with that theory. It's just something that we hear from some experts who suggest that maybe
Michael
a
Shea
bit of
was a
a
special
handicap.
teams coordinator, wasn't he? Before,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
I
but he was
he
also a defensive specialist as well.
Yeah.
To be
Well,
fair.
he handled the defense, and here in Toronto, he had a big responsibility, I think, and he's one of the main reasons why they won the Grey Cup in 2012. There's another coach in Hamilton that deserves some of that credit, and of course, back then they had a really good, they had a great coaching staff. But yeah, that's the impression anyway. But when I said that, I meant special teams. When defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators, even offensive quarterback coaches, that's not unusual. Special teams is a little different. He's pretty unique, but that doesn't mean anything other than just that comment that I've heard from the experts. It's one of the comments I've heard from experts. Do I believe it? Like I said, no, not necessarily. So their team has a problem, and this week they had a built-in excuse. We're talking now the flu, not COVID, the flu. And before COVID came in, that was a thing. It was a thing. It's always been a thing in a hockey season, especially where players get the flu and they get taken off the roster and they sit out the game when they get the flu. So the flu is a very important thing that can affect players adversely. And as we heard after the game, that the offensive line were getting treated intravenously. As far as handling the flu. But for me, having said that, and then please you go, man. For me, The real problem was the offense couldn't handle the defense of Winnipeg, and the the defense of Saskatchewan, more than even the offense, could not handle the offense of Winnipeg. Winnipeg just what first 8 possessions they scored, something like that. It's crazy, 6 or 8. They scored on each possession. They didn't have a they didn't kick off until I think at the end of the third quarter, somewhere in the third quarter. So they never kicked. So that was more than just the offensive line. I don't think Saskatchewan would have won anyway. But what are your feelings about the health, the game, the special teams? That was the one thing that was good for Saskatchewan. They ran back for a touchdown.
Yeah, so for me, it was I didn't know it was that bad for them, right? And I'll admit, I mean, I told you on the weekend that a lot of the time, especially the late night games or if there's a busy game, I'm usually watching them later. I usually PVR them and I watch them in full later. So I wasn't really paying attention to the game too much. Then I see the score, and I'm like, what? That can't be right. And then I heard then I was talking to a friend of mine who's big into the CFL, another a coworker of mine, and he's like, "Yeah, they had a bad stomach flu." Like he says, "I can't even." He says, "A game like this, you can't really judge it properly because the players are sick." And I think I was a little critical on Saskatchewan when I was talking to him. I said, "Oh, that's like pretty bad," because it's an important game. The Banjo Bowl is in a lot of ways more important for the two fan bases than the actual Labor Day. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I have to think of it from the player side. If I was yakking and whatever dehydrated, I probably would have a hard time, especially running around the field and all those things. And you talked about the IVs. Yeah, I think you give Saskatchewan a bit of a pass this week, especially against a team that no one has really, other than the one game that Montreal won in, I would say a little bit of a fluke considering the missed field goals and all those things. Not, I mean, obviously Montreal did enough to win the game, but um, yeah, like that's the worst team to have something like that happen to. So I have a bit of pity on Saskatchewan, but you also saw Winnipeg. What you saw from Winnipeg there too was, yeah, you guys are hurting. Yeah, you guys are not at your best, but that doesn't matter to us. That instinct of we're just going to do our thing no matter what.
I don't have anything to say anymore other than their record is 6-7, and they need to beat two teams that are at 3-9. So that means they've got a little less than 3 games. In other words, they can't finish tied. So that really means they have a 2 game lead on those two teams. If Saskatchewan's poor play, health, penalty calls, quarterbacking insecurity, ball insecurity, offense that can't score, all these lovely reasons why a team can't win. If they don't win, if they allow the other two, either one of Hamilton or Ottawa, to win 2 games or more than them to the end of the season, Saskatchewan won't be playing in the playoffs and definitely not playing in the Grey Cup in Regina, Saskatchewan. That's right, their home turf. This is a big deal in Saskatchewan. The last time that team, that organization represented the CFL in the Grey Cup, which they did against Hamilton, they won the
2013
Grey Cup.
was
So to go from that memory to a game right now that is 95% sold out. 95% sold out. Are they all Rider fans? Probably not. But I would suggest if the previous Grey Cup is any indication or example, that's what the odds are going to be when you look at, or the odds or the numbers that the representation of Rider fans versus the other team. Because that's what happened when Hamilton made it to that Grey Cup, and Caleros was actually, I think Caleros played for Hamilton in that game. In that game, it might
well,
have been. He played
uh,
in one of the Hamilton games. I don't know if it was that one. You know what? I'm not sure if it was Caleros, but Hamilton was there, and son of a gun, they lost, and they lost big in that stadium.
They did. No, it was. I remember that game. I mean, obviously, you remember the game because it was. First off, it was in Saskatchewan, right? So that 8 years ago too. Well, 9 years ago now. 9 years this year. So almost 10 years. You think about it. They last. We're in that position. I'm just trying to think who was the quarter. I think you are right because it would have been 2013, and that would have been the year after the Argos won. And Caleros might have still been on Toronto. Actually, I'm just trying to look up the Argos roster. It was either Caleros or I know Ricky Ray was there, but I'm trying to think who the
It was
backup.
the 2014 Grey Cup. 12 Toronto. No, wait. 11 BC, 12 Toronto, 13. The 2013 Grey
Yeah, so it was not
Cup,
no.
because
So
they were the they were the third team to win it.
yeah, so Caleros was still on the Argos at that time. So
Claros was still in the Argos. Okay.
yeah, so
Let's
he
see.
left the year after that. Yeah, see, well, McDonald,
And that,
he was right. Yeah, Caleros wasn't there until 2014.
but Caleros went to the Grey Cup with the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
That,
Um, the, I distinctly remember him losing a Grey Cup with Hamilton, but that may be just
well,
my
I mean, Hamilton's
imagination, I
been to quite
guess.
a few Grey Cups in this time, though.
And they've lost a few. Wait, they've lost them all in this century. Um, Trying to see here. Uh, they're not. They're not showing who were the quarterbacks.
See, 2014.
Well, you know what? I just got the best
Kevin
way to do
Glenn
it
was
is I'm just going to
back
go
in
to
2013.
Caleros.
Kevin
What's
Glenn was
that?
the quarterback for Hamilton, and Durant was the
Gotcha.
quarterback for Saskatchewan. Then
Yeah, he was. He,
2014, as Will McDonald said, Caleros went to Hamilton, and they went to the Grey Cup again, and they lost to Calgary.
right, and he was the
Yeah,
quarterback for
and Bo
that
Levi
game.
Mitchell was the quarterback, as he said. That was his first. I believe
Yeah,
that would have been his first Grey Cup win with Calgary.
right. The point being, I guess. Sorry for struggling,
We're
folks,
trying to. We're going back.
and a lot of.
Man, let's not forget. This is like think that this was like 8 years ago. We're going back 8 9 years ago. We're trying to like I sometimes
I'm good. I'm good with it. I'm good with it. I don't blame you. You're much younger than I am. It's something I should remember. I was more
the
of an
game of
adult
use your
than you when
brain
that
now.
happened. It is. It is what it is. I'm truly, truly amazed at the fact that Caleros back there, he has been to the Grey Cup a lot. He's done a lot of winning. He's come a long way, and now in Winnipeg, obviously, he's become basically the perfect quarterback for that. What is at this time as close to perfect a team as you'll find. So but and of course that's the other team that was on the field in this game. And so I was trying to make tie things up there with Caleros being there. So every time Caleros plays the next team, I'm sure it brings up a lot of great feelings because he played for Saskatchewan in his first game for Saskatchewan in Hamilton. He got
Mm-hmm.
injured, and that began the great finish that he's had in his career to this point, which is he left Saskatchewan, went to Toronto, then was shipped to
Yeah,
Winnipeg. So it's something. It's something that I'll always remember, and Winnipeg fans are so grateful that they have him. You have to wonder if you're a Rider fan and if you're the Rider organization and you're asking yourself, there's that guy ripping us to shreds and we had him. It's the same story. It's funny, isn't it? That it's the same story that we see with the young BC quarterback that everybody passed over and then they got to play him too in Rourke. So, there's some threads of consistency here that mentioned because that I am mentioning, and I'm because it's amazing how close, David, you go from being a very successful team to a team that really finds itself in trouble. You know, you say those two names, and as I said, they're two quarterbacks, Rourke and Caleros, who almost every team had a chance to have. And I believe every team had a chance to have both. Maybe Caleros didn't play for every team, but I think he was available to every team. And you see what he's done, and you see what Rourke has done in the time that he had to play. And, teams like Saskatchewan and other teams that are struggling because they can't find a quarterback, like Hamilton, who are having difficulty having a quarterback. That's the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the CFL landscape, you look back to the fact that in 2013, we bring up that 2013 Argos team, Ricky Ray, Zach Claros, Trevor Harris, three quarterbacks,
Think about that. Think
right?
about that.
And
Amazing.
eventually down the road, the Argos had to make decisions. Do we keep Ricky Ray or do we kind of usher in the younger group? Well, you're not gonna say no to a future Hall of Famer. So this is where they had to depart with the other guys. And the other guys knew that they could be starters. They didn't want to sit behind Ricky Ray. I think when you look at the CFL quarterback landscape now, Saskatchewan pretty much okay. Claros has the concussion. Fajardo comes in and they were a good team. So, so they
Absolutely.
had to make a decision. Like, do we invest in Cody Fajardo or do we see what happened with Zach Claros? Because Claros was dealing with all the injury issues during his time with Hamilton, they probably said, you know what, let's go with the guy who we think can be
Yeah.
on the field for us. The biggest regret out of all of this has to be on the Argos side, which was, we're not Zach. No, I'll give Jim Pop a credit. He traded for Claros, had a contract ready for him. He gets let go, and all that is pushed to the side, and Claros is traded to Winnipeg, and the rest is history. You don't think Toronto right now is continually kicking themselves, knowing that they let a future MOP player leave again, second time they've allowed him to leave. And so, yeah, we're seeing, I think right now is look, the only ways really you can get a good quarterback in the CFL, it seems, is you draft them, you,
Steal them. Steal
or you steal
them.
them in free agency if another team decides we're letting them go, right? Or a team decides we're done, right? We're moving on. And that's what I think. That's what Ottawa was trying to do with Jeremiah Mazzoli when they got Mazzoli from Hamilton.
They're trying to steal a quarterback.
Exactly. One that they knew and one that they didn't have to put as much development in. But I think teams are going to have to start realizing that development needs to start with these younger quarterbacks who I think have a little more. They can just bring out a lot more in an offense. I think we're seeing that with Nathan Rourke. I think hopefully one day we'll see that with Trey Ford if he's afforded the proper development path and if he's putting in the work too. I think this has got to be the start of where the carousel of the quarterbacks needs to be. We're not going to keep around the guys who can't perform. It just simply can't happen.
I, I'm, this is this is a drum that we beat all the
Uh,
time, and I'm going to try and beat it very little this time, but I'm going to beat it anyway for a time for a little bit. The Canadian Football League, as a league, has to figure out how to develop quarterbacks beyond the teams. I think the league has to figure something out that allows quarterbacks to be taught how to play the Canadian game. The reality is, you know, the reality is that Canadian quarterbacks are very rare that can play at an elite level in the Canadian Football League. We have seen we have seen this year a quarterback dominate a Canadian quarterback. But my point is, because teams have to steal good quarterbacks, I just wonder if there has to be some rule that allows them to keep more quarterbacks, and I really do think they have to open an extra roster spot for a quarterback. They have to. I don't know what it is they have to do. This is just To me, the easiest thing to do is to ensure that they have more quarterbacks getting reps, because you really don't know a young American quarterback is going to be a great Canadian Football League quarterback. You just don't know it. You don't know it for 4 or 5 years. You don't know. You don't know. Trevor Harris, Zach Caleros, the list goes on and on. Bo Levi Mitchell, Mike Riley, all these guys didn't really monopolize or monopolize their skill until about 28, 29 years
Mhm.
old, right? And then what happens is their their time frame is extended because of the desperation of teams to maintain a quarterback with that experience. So we see guys like Ricky Ray. We see guys, that have been Mazzoli. We see them because the desperation to keep a guy that knows the Canadian Football League as a quarterback, he becomes very precious. So I'm just in a crazy mood right now, and I just want to. I hope that we can figure something out. The league, the teams. Is it the fault of the team? We talk about the Argo team that we follow. Do they have a backup quarterback that knows how to play the Canadian Football League? No. Do they have a quarterback that has the skill and maybe the maturity and ability to learn the game? Yes. But it's not something that happens in a matter of months. It literally takes years in reality. There are exceptions, of course. Of course, there are players that pick it up, quarterbacks that pick it up really quick. But there's got to be something done in the Canadian Football League to accelerate the learning process, the ability of greatly talented quarterbacks from down south that come up here and shrink that time frame where they adapt to the game. Or, David, the other issue is, do we have to adapt the game to those quarterbacks? Because quite frankly, the game is not that good and it's not that interesting when Hamilton plays Toronto at home and Hamilton don't have a quarterback. We see what happens. It's just lunacy to allow your league to look like that. I'm done with my rant. That's all I got to say about
But we're seeing this in the league right now, where I think it's the biggest theme of the CFL this year, where there are just two elite quarterbacks in this league. That every week that player goes out, there's a really good chance that they're going to not only play very well, but they're going to lead their team to win. And that's Zach Claros, and that was Nathan Rourke. That's the biggest problem the CFL has right now. And we're going to keep beating that drum, because guess what? It is apparent now that when you don't have Nathan Rourke on the field, and you see what BC looks like without Nathan Rourke on the field, you see what Winnipeg does when the other team is not up to snuff, and their quarterback effortlessly puts up 4 touchdowns, effortlessly like that. I'm sorry, Winnipeg did not have to do much in that
it.
game,
Oh,
and that's what it means to have an elite quarterback. Ricky Ray against that team likely would have done a similar thing. Ricky Ray didn't always have the best players around him. He didn't need it, because he knew how to right. You look at other quarterbacks, even Bo Levi Mitchell in his best days could have picked apart Saskatchewan in a game like that. And now we're seeing it. Maybe we're seeing it with Jake Mayer. Maybe. I'm still. It's too early to say, because the consistency hasn't been there. But maybe he's the next one. But right now, I only see two.
I see more than that. I see more than that, but for a different reason. You're talking about elite. I'm talking about quarterbacks that can compete with those elite quarterbacks that you're talking about. There's a handful that can. I'll throw Meyer in there. I'll throw Harris in there. I'll throw McLeod Bethel Thompson, who's becoming, I think, a very dependable quarterback. He's mechanical. He's not not a gazelle out there. But his mechanics are as good as, I think, as any quarterback. His immobility is a negative factor, but doesn't matter what quarterback he plays against with his team, they'll be competitive with that team. We did see them not look very good against some teams this year. that happens, but it's the predictability factor that frightens me for the Canadian Football League and as a fan of the game. When you, like I said, I repeat, when Toronto goes into Hamilton last week and you knew Hamilton was going to lose, that's the last thing you want. If you're a league, you don't want to have a team go into another town, or especially into their hometown, their home field, and beat the what out of them. And it looked great. The game looked a lot better than it really was, in my opinion. But again, leave that behind. The point is, we need to have backup quarterbacks that are good Canadian Football League quarterbacks that can ensure that if the team has a little bit of advantage as a defense and offense and special teams, it isn't frittered away by the quarterback, which is what we're seeing, which is bad. That's the bad part. So the competitive edge, I'm not talking about every team has to have a Zach Caleros, or not every team's ever going to, because this kid Rourke he's over the moon. Not every team can have a Nathan Rourke. But every team should have a team that can compete with those guys, that can make up for it with a little better defense, a little better, special teams, a little better offense around the quarterback, little better coaching. There's lots of things that make a great team. And that's why my frustration with quarterbacks, because when you have one player is going to be the reason whether you win or lose, and if he's not there, you're going to lose. Yikes. That just ain't good. That's not good. So please, CFL, figure out how you can create an environment, whether it's you change the rules in some way that helps quarterbacks learn the game faster, because I think that's what it is. They've got to figure out how to make American quarterbacks, I'm repeating myself, play better faster. They got to learn to play better faster. Is there a system that they can apply? Coaching system? I don't know. Is there rules that they can change? I don't know. Can they figure out a better way to pick the guys that are better quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League? I don't know. But it's got to be something in there, something like that. So yeah, I don't like the idea that a team doesn't stand a chance because they lose. In fairness to Hamilton, and in fairness to quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League, they lost two quarterbacks. So now the third quarterback is the one that is the problem now, and that's not his fault either. I want to make that clear. American quarterbacks don't understand the game when they get here.
I think I think you know what it really comes down to, and somebody, can't remember who asked it, but sorry. I think the big one here, thank
Plus,
you. The big one is investment in the position, because guess what? How many? I should have researched this. How many teams have a dedicated quarterback coach? How many leagues? How many of how does the CFL put together camps, like like development camps for quarterbacks? What they started doing, I remember this in 2018, I think 2019 as well. They had like a bit of an apprenticeship program where during training camp, a U Sports quarterback, so one of the Canadian University quarterbacks, was in training camp with.
they did that for a long time until a couple of years ago.
But you know what the issue is? I'm sorry, but a
I don't
CFL
know.
coach is not going to prioritize this Canadian university kid because he's got to worry about getting his own quarterbacks up to snuff. That was in my opinion, when I saw that, I'm like, it's a neat idea, but the execution just wasn't there on it. You have to put in that, like, a lot of these quarterbacks now do their own things in the offseason. We're like, all right, let's get together and let's work on things together. They get receivers from the league, they get CFL players, and they try to do like their own workout camps. The league has to do a better job of supporting them, in my opinion.
I wonder if I don't know. One thing I didn't mention, because this wasn't planned. It was all off the top of my head, off my pointy little head. The other thing that they could do is they could lift the cap a little bit and dedicate that money to a backup quarterback. Like, make that part of the quarterback that they can spend. They can spend. I'll give you more money, so you can have maybe 800,000 on quarterbacks. That you bring that money in, and you kind of force the teams. You force the teams maybe for their own good. You force the teams to bring in more than one really good quarterback. I don't know. I don't know how much it helps in recruitment. How much an extra couple of $100,000 to a football player, a quarterback in particular. I don't know how much that helps, David, but I'm at the frustrated point where I'd be willing to try because I want to know if the CFL can have multiple quarterbacks on teams, on every team, so that if one goes down, they still got a shot when the other one when that one goes down. The pipeline, the quarterback pipeline is and this sounds like an insult to the quarterbacks that are in the Canadian Football League, so I want to apologize to them personally for this statement, but I'm trying to be honest here. And my honest opinion is there aren't enough great quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League. We need to have more great quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League. I love Trevor Harris. I love Zach Caleros. I love Nathan Rourke. I love Mazzoli. I mean, I love these great quarterbacks. Even Bo Levi Mitchell, who apparently isn't good enough to be number one. All these wonderful quarterbacks. They're fantastic. It's not that I dislike or think one of them isn't good enough or that group isn't good enough. I just don't think the group is big enough. I just don't think the group of great quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League is big enough. It needs to be bigger. Come on, the games, the way it'll be better is if quarterbacks can keep the other team, the other team's offense off the field. If you can't keep the other team's offense off the field, guess what's going to happen?
I think when you look at all, I mean, I know we want to go through all the games, but I think the common theme on all four games, none of them were close. There was clearly one team are better than the other throughout the entire game. One team was clearly better than the other. And that's not the CFL. The CFL is all about competitive games, close games. Didn't have that this week.
No. So we then have, I guess, what game do you want to do next? I'll let you pick.
So we did Winnipeg, Saskatchewan. Maybe we can go. You want to go to the other blowout?
Yeah, go to
Calgary,
the other
Edmonton.
blowout. Go to the other blowout. I'm not even like that's. Part of me, I guess, subconsciously, I don't even want to talk about these games because it's terrible.
This is that game. That was another game where a lot of it too was turnovers and just it's just lackluster play. Like you saw. It's funny because you look at the stat sheet, you wonder how did Calgary put up 56 points. That game was not reminiscent of a 56-point effort, considering the quarterback only had one touchdown
Right.
and his team, yeah, a lot. I'm gonna say this: too many field goals again. I'm
Well,
just
they
like,
changed the rules to benefit the field goal kickers. They put the hash marks closer together. They're
mhm.
starting the teams further up the field, so field goal kickers are being called upon more and more, right? Well, look what happened with Winnipeg. They didn't kick the ball. They didn't punt the ball till the third quarter because they were always close enough at least to get a field goal. So yeah, in this game, same thing. You look at the statistics, and I'm going to contradict myself by mentioning these statistics. Jake Meyer was 20 of 26, 287 yards, one TD, no interceptions. Cornelius Taylor, 23 of 32, 71.9%, 292 for two TDs and one interception. At its base, right? You'll look at that and say, well, the difference really wasn't the quarterback, so quarterbacks weren't the problem, right? You could say that and sound like you're right. But here's the problem. What we're talking about is the quarterbacks couldn't overcome the other team's kicker.
Yeah.
The quarterback couldn't overcome the kicker. Not good. That's not the way the game is supposed to go.
Can I mean we don't necessarily need to talk about the individual games this week because I did want to bring up one thing this week.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna read to you. How long am I gonna go with this? This 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'll go with the top 10
Hmm.
rushing touchdown leaders this season.
Okay.
The top 10.
Okay.
Caleb Evans has 10.
Quarterback.
Dominique Davis has 10.
Quarterback.
Kadeem Carey has 7.
Running back.
Nathan Rourke has 7.
Quarterback.
Cody Fajardo has 7.
Quarterback.
Kai Loxley 6.
He's another
Quarterback.
quarterback, right? Yeah.
Yeah, used as a quarterback. Tommy Stevens with 6. The quarterback.
Another quarterback. Yeah.
Taylor Cornelius 5.
Another quarterback.
Dakota Prukop 5.
Quarterback.
Brady Oliveira 3.
Running back. So 2 running backs out of 10.
2 running backs are among your top touchdown leaders, and you keep going down the list. It's James Butler 3. That's another running back. Jamie Newman, quarterback, has 3. Antonio Pipkin, quarterback, 3. Drew Bound. This is another issue I have with the CFL offenses. Why is it? I understand it's probably it's the way that all offenses have been doing it for all these years. But I'm actually getting tired of seeing the quarterback sneak on the goal line for a touchdown. I
It
am.
does happen a
You
lot.
don't see the
It's predictable.
throws. You're not seeing the throws in the end zone anymore. You have this massive end zone of 20 yards, some 15, 20 yards. Use it to your
David,
advantage.
now I'm always willing to admit when facts don't look at the way I think, but this one does look the way I think. It speaks to the fact that coaches do not have the confidence in a quarterback to either hand the ball off or throw it.
It speaks to how good defensive linemen are in the CFL because they have found ways to close gaps, and maybe the offensive linemen aren't. But I also think of it this way: the offensive linemen have to push the defensive line in a way to give that quarterback a chance to get into the end zone. You tell me a running back couldn't try to do the same? I also just it's not even just getting the running back going. I think the first team that decides we're gonna look like we're gonna sneak the ball or we're gonna hand it off and we're gonna do play action and get that easy touch. So I said that's probably the easiest play because nobody will see it coming. Everybody will think it's going to be a run at the 1 yard line. I just
Then
think
maybe they have to cap the defensive line. Maybe you got to force teams not to spend so much money on the defensive line. I love defenders. Don't get me wrong. Again, all I'm thinking about is keeping this league alive. That's my bottom line. That's my North Star, keeping this league alive. And the way it's, maybe that's what they have to do so that quarterbacks have a better opportunity to be better. So the level of talent at the quarterback position is not handicapped by the level of talent at the defensive position.
I'll
By
make
your by your
I'll make
state,
a better suggestion than that.
please do.
You have on the offensive line, you put a maximum number that you can have starting Canadians on the offensive line, because then it forces you on the offense. You know what? Now we got to go with the Canadian receiver. We got to go with the Canadian running back. Canadians can do other things than play offensive line, and I think, yeah, a lot of these Canadians get jobs as offensive linemen. I totally get that, but they can do other things. There are Canadians that can play receiver, that can play running back. Make sure that if you have a team, you say you can only start this many on the offensive line, and you have to start this many on the defensive line.
Okay, so I understand let me see if I understand what you're saying. You understand what I'm saying about handicapping defensive lines.
Yeah.
You're saying we should enhance offensive lines in a way, try to promote the
Yes.
idea and create some sort of rule that forces teams to pay more respect to the position of offensive line. And please, CFL organizations and teams, don't think that I don't think you respect the offensive line.
Hmm.
But what I am and what I think David is saying is that there's an imbalance at the line of scrimmage in the Canadian
Yes.
Football League, an imbalance that's leading to a game that's not as much fun to watch.
It's not just not as fun to watch. You see the mismatch when quarterbacks are getting hurt because they can't stop. These defensive linemen are good. Like these guys have played. Like I look at the guys who are leading the CFL right now in quarterback sacks. Like Lorenzo Malden has 12 in 12 games. Sean Lemon has 10 and 12 games. Sean Lemon's been doing this for years. A lot of
Great.
these guys, there's only one Canadian among the top defensive linemen in sacks, and that's Matthew Betts with 7. Other than that, there are not many Canadians up there because not a lot of there are Canadians playing on the defensive line. There are. It's just you're seeing it's a majority of the time it's an American position, and I think that's a problem. I think
So
they
are we there, David? Two fans of the Canadian Football League, two people that cover the Canadian Football League with a lot of care and time and serious admiration of the game. Is it time to talk about eliminating Canadians? Is that where we're going with this conversation? Because that's what it's beginning to sound like to me. Is that the league can no longer carry Canadian players that aren't good enough to be in the league. And that's a horrible thing for me to say because that's the worst thing I want to say. That's the last thing I want to say. It's the most horrible thing I want to say. But in this conversation, the reality is that somehow there has to be competitive balance, and unfortunately we get very easily into competitive imbalance. The explanation, I guess, can be other people's. I'm just having a conversation with you, and I come in with my prejudices about quarterbacks and stuff needing to be stars, not just starters. Um, yeah, that I don't
I
know.
don't like I personally don't think it's about getting rid of Canadians. I do think I look at MLS. That should be if I'm the CFL, MLS is the model you're trying to go for in terms of being a North American sport that's not the best league of its sport. Like MLS is not the best soccer league in the world, but it's a pretty good league that's pretty healthy and it prioritizes teams to have, in MLS it's Americans. For the Canadian teams, you can have a certain number of. You're encouraged to have more Canadians and local talent, and they say you can only bring in three players at whatever price you want to pay, pretty much, but you can only have three of them. But they still prioritize to have the other positions Americans and Canadians. You can't just go to a South American
Yeah,
country and go and get the best there, or go to a European team and say
you're
we get
limited. You're limited.
you're
They're trying
limited.
to promote the game and the players that play in North America. David, we don't have much time. Let's
Yeah,
go to the other two games, but first finish by saying this
here.
game between Calgary was fantastic.
Yeah,
They're a
Edmonton.
great organization. They're a well coached team, and that's the advantage that they have this year. They have done a masterful job of the way they coach their team. Next man up mentality they've had for years. This year, they're incredible. Let's go over to BC and Montreal. Again, you would have referred to that, I guess, as one of the games that wasn't close.
Was not close because even though Montreal's quarterback play wouldn't have suggested it, but BC made too many mistakes and Montreal took advantage. Too many mistakes and look, the drop off at quarterback. I know you're a big Antonio Pipkin guy. That game showed me, unfortunately, that Antonio Pipkin, in my opinion, isn't capable of being a starting quarterback in this league anymore.
That's why they're starting Adams the next week.
Yeah. In my opinion, that was a game I still think BC had a chance, but I think it was really I think it was the third quarter that did them in. Like
It's amazing how one player not in the lineup can make such a difference.
and it's not just one player. I just think it's like yeah, I think Nathan Rourke playing that game makes a whole heck of a lot of a
They look totally
big
different
difference.
without him.
But yeah, no, they
They look
can't run the
totally
ball they can't run the ball anymore with James Butler. Just teams are no longer have to say we have to watch out for the quarterback. They can do the whole offense is now being they're just a step behind, and I think maybe we'll see what happens with Vernon Adams. Maybe he can be a difference.
Then there was the final game that we're talking about. Wasn't the final game, but it's the final game we're talking about. The team that we cover, the Toronto Argonauts, 24-19 over Ottawa. Ottawa came on strong at the end, but just couldn't do enough. The Argos defense again snuffed out a team that looked like they were making a comeback.
this is where I'm. You know, we were talking about getting rid of or like not prioritizing Canadians. Curly Giddens Jr. This
Hmm.
a game where, and you ask me, do you think he's the best Canadian? I think he's the best Canadian offensive player. There might be some. The last 2 years has been a defensive player that's won the award. It hasn't been won by a Canadian offensive player since 2018 when Brad Sinopoli did it. But I think Curly Giddens Jr. If he can get back to this was a bounce back game from him. He hasn't looked the same the
He's
last
had a
few weeks.
couple of games where he hasn't looked as good.
Yeah, but this is a game to shows that shows what a good Canadian player can do. And this game should not have been close. This is a game the Argos again did not take advantage of a pretty bad BC team. BC team, Ottawa team. Boris Beatty had 5 field goal attempts. Field goals keep teams in games, especially Ottawa, and that's the problem with a lot of these teams right now. They're not going for those touchdowns. You got to start going for touchdowns because if you allow teams to stay in it, like Ottawa had a chance to tie or win this game. Toronto needed their defense to step up. But I think it was a good thing to see Curly Giddens Jr. play well. I think Nick Arbuckle's done pretty well since he's taken over as a starting quarterback. But that offense, there, that was just a good defensive performance from the Argos defense to keep Ottawa out of the end zone, except for the most part. Too many field goals in this game. Argos have to figure that out. They cannot rely just on field goals to win games. It's got to be touchdowns. They need to start putting opponents away, especially in that fourth quarter. They had 0 points in the fourth quarter. 0. Ottawa had 10, and they could have had more if the Argos defense didn't step up the way they did.
Well, let's remember that Beatty was 60% on success with field goals.
Yeah. Well, another issue I have in the CFL is you're wondering why no lead is safe. Well, it's because teams are settling for field goals too much, right? Or on
And
the
not making them. And not making them. We've
exact
seen
and
a
not
lot of
making.
victories that had to do with kickers missing field goals.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, that we've got going on here. Um, the Canadian Football League is a great game. We've seen lots of great games. We want to see more great games. I've been very insistent about quarterbacks, but I got to tell you, when the game is played right, this is a great game. When it gets off the rails, like we saw in a couple of games, it really isn't as appealing. And I'm afraid that it's important that the game be appealing, David. That's all I'm trying to how to make it more appealing. And I really think it's quarterbacks. They need offenses that work. And unfortunately, defenses win championships. Therefore, the attraction for organizations to key on great defenses, but they're
Yeah.
not entertaining.
Defense is also more coachable in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely. Uh,
I think Ottawa.
you
I
can't
will say
teach
this about
talent.
I will say this about Ottawa. Just my final thought: if they find a way to string together a few wins and Saskatchewan loses, I think there's a good chance either Ottawa gets third,
So,
second
yeah,
in the East. If Montreal's kind of iffy for me, but I still think Ottawa has a chance. But they got to start
absolutely.
putting up touchdowns on offense.
The odds of there being a tie in a game in the Canadian Football League are remote. We have seen it, but very rarely. So, in essence, that means that as long as a tie between Ottawa, Hamilton, and either of them and Saskatchewan means they get in. So, in essence, right now, Saskatchewan has a 2-game lead, not a 3-game lead like you would think looking at the standings. And a 2-game lead with about 5 games left, there's a swing there that's possible.
Yeah,
Either of those teams get hot. If Hamilton gets a quarterback, gets healthy, one of their better quarterbacks, watch out. It could be interesting. And I
very,
haven't looked down the road if they play each other, so that should be interesting too.
yeah, very interesting.
The games that Saskatchewan plays against Ottawa and Hamilton will be deadly if they have to play them.
Exactly, I do believe that.
Okay, David, thanks for doing this.
Thanks again, Frank.
Okay, he's David Morassutti. I'm Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk. Check out my YouTube channel, Candid Frank Live, and you can watch all the shows that we do here. Hope to see you again next time. Thanks for watching. For David Morassutti, I'm Frank Stanisci.